Go. Okay. Please help me welcome our guest speaker for the morning. Professor Meg Urry is the Israel Munson Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Yale University and Director of the Yale Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics. Professor Urry received her Bachelor of Science degree in Physics and Mathematics, summa cum laude, from Tufts University in 1977, and her master's degree and her PhD, both in physics and astronomy, from Johns Hopkins University. She joined the Yale faculty in 2001 as the first woman with a tenured position in the Yale Physics Department. A fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the National Academy of Sciences, Professor Urry is past president of the American Astronomical Society. Among her many honors, she has mentioned that she is particularly proud of having received the Edward A. Boucher Leadership Medal for her efforts to broaden student participation in STEM fields. Professor Urry's research concerns involve active galaxies powered by supermassive black holes at their centers. Professor Meg Urry, again, thank you. Thank you for spending time with us this morning. Welcome to the Greenway Talks. Welcome to Palomar Observatory. For everybody, you can type questions into the chat and we'll open the floor for questions at the end of the presentation. For that reason, right now, I'll ask everyone to turn off their microphones. And with that, Professor Urry, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you for everyone for coming. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. Let me share my screen. I hope you're seeing my slide now.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So the story I'm going to tell you today is about the supermassive black holes that lie at the centers of most galaxies, and how they may have impacted or may not have impacted the evolution of galaxies across the last 13 billion years or so. So this story starts with first with the galaxies. I'm showing here a montage of some very different looking galaxies. Their shapes are a clue to their past history. For example, can you see my mouse if I move it? Are you seeing? You're seeing that. Okay, thank you. So this in the lower panel, this roundish galaxy is one that probably recently had a major merger of two disk galaxies. That means that two roughly equal mass disks with different angular momentum merge and collide and reform into a sort of spherical kind of galaxy. But as you see, most of the other galaxies, this one in the upper right clearly has a big disk with spiral arms, but it's a disk. This is probably what our Milky Way looks like, although obviously we can't take a picture of our Milky Way because we're inside it, but this one probably looks a lot like our Milky Way. This disk galaxy on the left here has a big bulge, and so the bulges are formed from mergers. So this one has had this one has had major mergers before, but has had time to build up the disk. So we can look at the shapes and learn a lot about the galaxy. This one in the middle, I guess I should say, it's obviously had a ton of mergers because it has this huge spherical part, but it also has a disk that's reforming. And then the color is telling us something about the star formation. The blue colors mean very hot young stars producing a lot of optical UV light. These are from the most massive stars, and of course, as you probably know, the most massive stars, you know, they live hard and they die young, and so they disappear as a galaxy ages, and then it becomes more yellow, like this one. This one has only old stars left, probably, and you see this pinkish color. That's typically where the dusty regions are, because they scatter blue light and absorb blue light. Anyway, one more thing I want to point out in this montage is you see a couple of pairs of galaxies. Here's one here on the right in the middle, and here's one in the upper left. And we can tell that these galaxies are gravitationally interacting because they have these tidal distortions that happen because the near sides of galaxies pull harder on each other than the far side. So each galaxy sort of gets stretched out. And you see that down here to a lesser extent. So from imaging, we can tell a lot about what's going on with the galaxies and what's happening with their stars. As you'll see, the black hole part is a little harder. But something that all of these galaxies, regardless of their many differences, one thing they all have in common is that they all have a supermassive black hole at their centers. And this is something we've only known for a couple of decades. When I was a graduate student, this was, people thought black holes were very rare in the centers of galaxies. What is a black hole? So a simple way to think about it is that it's an object whose escape velocity is greater than the speed of light. Escape velocity is the speed with which you must leave a surface in order to escape that body's gravitational pull. So for example, if you go outside and throw a baseball up, you could put 10 or 20 meters high, but you can't throw it hard enough to have it actually escape the gravitational pull of the Earth. It's always going to fall down. NASA can launch rockets fast enough to have escaped the gravitational pull. And the speed with which you have to launch something so that it reaches infinite distance away with no extra velocity, that's called the escape velocity. So Einstein told us that no particles, or whether they have mass or not, can move faster than the speed of light. And so if the escape velocity is greater than the speed of light, then nothing escapes the black hole, not particles and not light. Black holes were conceived of actually several hundred years ago. A British scientist, John Mitchell, wrote this paper on the means of discovering the distance, magnitude, and so on of the fixed stars. It's a very long title, actually longer than that. And I should say that Pierre Laplace independently came up with the same idea around the same time, that there might be stars whose light could not escape them, that were somehow so massive that the light could not escape them and they would be dark. And Mitchell had this further interesting insight that this is literally what he says: if there exist in nature any bodies whose light could not arrive at us, we could have no information from light. Yet, if any other luminous body should happen to revolve around them, we might infer the influence of the central one. So he's pointing out a really important idea, which is that you can learn about the central gravitating object by looking at things. The Earth's orbit tells us a lot about the mass of the sun, as does the orbit of every planet around the sun. So it's the same basic idea. We could learn about black holes, even though they're not emitting light. We could learn about them by looking at the material or the stars that are orbiting them. So this movie that I'm showing you, wait a second, before I do it, there is some way to optimize movies for computers. Okay, let's see if that helps. I know these will sometimes be jerky on over Zoom, over the internet, but let's try. So this is a movie made by Andrea Ghez and her group at UCLA. She, you may recognize the name. She recently won the Nobel Prize for this work. She has for several decades mapped the orbits of stars at the very center of our galaxy around a point called Sagittarius A star, which has a radio source, which is believed to be the location of the black hole at the center of our galaxy. And what you should notice from these orbits is that the stars moving fastest are very close to the central gravitating thing. And out at the outskirts of this ensemble of stars that she has measured, some of the orbits haven't even been completed because they take more than a few decades to go all the way around. And that's That's because as you get more distant from the black hole, the gravitational force is weaker. And so the speed with which the object orbits is less. This is a direct manifestation of Kepler's laws, but you can also intuitively understand it. You know, if you think about taking a stone on a string and spinning it rapidly around, you know that to make it go faster, you have to pull harder, right? To make the object go around faster, you have to pull harder. And if you go more slowly, you don't have to pull as hard. It's exactly the same idea. The greater the force, the faster the velocity of revolution. So from those stars, we learned enough about our central supermassive black hole in the Milky Way. It's about 4 million times the mass of our sun. So that, well, we learned many things about it. And Andrea Ghez and her colleague Reinhard Genzel in Germany got the Nobel Prize for that. So of course, we don't use Newton's gravity any longer. In fact, black holes really came out of Einstein's theory of general relativity, which instead of thinking about Newton's idea of a force between two masses, Einstein thought about a mass deforming the geometry of space-time. I'm not going to go into general relativity today, but let me just say that right out of his equations come the following relation, that a black hole size, or the radius of it, if you think of the radius of the horizon of a black hole, is equal to 2 times the gravitational constant from Newton's law, that times the mass of the black hole divided by the speed of light squared. In other words, the size of a black hole is directly proportional to its mass. And I should explain that there's not like it's not like a beach ball or an egg. It doesn't have a hard shell, a black hole. The radius is just a location within which the escape velocity is greater than the speed of light. If you went across the horizon of a black hole, you wouldn't know that you were going across it. You wouldn't feel anything different at that location. But the people behind you would notice. Well, actually, they wouldn't notice, but that's a different story. Okay, and then I have to go into general relativity, so I'm going to skip that. But they would not see you go across it either. Okay. Let me just mention a few black hole sizes and masses to give you a sort of sense of this. If you took the entire Earth and squeezed it down to a small enough volume that it was a black hole, it would basically be about the size of a grape. So the entire Earth inside a grape is a black hole. No one's done that yet. If you instead took a pretty heavy star, maybe 10 times the mass of the sun, and made it into a black hole, it would have a radius of about 3 kilometers. So the size of New Haven, the town I live near. I studied the more massive black holes. One of the smaller supermassive black holes is our own Milky Way black hole, which, as I said, is about 4 million times the mass of our sun. And its radius is about 6% of the Earth's orbit. So even though, the solar system, well, the sun is just one of 100 billion stars in our galaxy, in our Milky Way galaxy, 100 billion of these stars. The only black hole at the center is smaller than even our solar system, like way smaller than our solar system. It's tiny. The bigger supermassive black holes are about 1 billion solar masses. I think the very biggest mass estimate that we have is about 10 billion solar masses. A 1 billion solar mass black hole would have a radius of a few light hours. And even that is still very small compared to the galaxy. For comparison, Pluto, which may or may not be, you may or may not think of as a planet, Pluto is about 10 light hours from the sun. So again, even the most massive supermassive black holes we know are smaller than our solar system, which is 1/100 billionth of the volume of the galaxy or smaller. So very tiny compared to the total galaxy. And I'll just say only these stellar mass and supermassive black holes are known to exist in nature. We don't know of black holes that are bigger or smaller, but they could exist. And of course, as I said, no matter escapes the black hole, no light escapes the black hole, but happily there is lots of light from the region outside the black hole. And we call galaxies that have rapidly growing black holes, that is lots of matter accreting onto the black hole, and therefore lots of radiation from the from the matter before it gets into the black hole. We call those active galactic nuclei, or AGN for short. And those are the objects that I study. Okay, how can we detect the presence of a black hole? As Mitchell said, and as Andrea Ghez has showed, we can weigh it by looking at the stars that orbit it, or we can, well, actually, and we can even do this for AGN. So let me just show you that. So this is a picture of a galaxy, this elliptical galaxy, NGC 1052. It's a relatively nearby galaxy, but even so, we cannot see the individual stars in it. We just see this general glow of light from the full. So the galaxy is this central thing, and all of that light is coming from individual stars that are not resolved. All this other stuff is either stars in our galaxy or other galaxies unrelated to NGC 1052. So we're looking at this guy. And we can't see the individual stars. So we can't map the orbits of the stars the way we do for our own galactic center. But what we can do is look at the average velocity of the stars as they orbit close to the black hole. And that's where Palomar comes in. So this spectrum was taken by my graduate student, Mary Powell, at Palomar using double spec. This is just the blue side. There's also a red spectrum. So what you're looking at is a plot of the flux of the object, the brightness of the object as a function of its wavelength. And as I say, this is the blue side of the spectrograph, so 4,000 to 5,400 angstroms. The red line is the data. That's the spectrum that Mary obtained. The blue line is a fit of a stellar continuum, which is made up of many different populations of stars, to this data. And you see it fits pretty well in most of the spectrum. So all of these little wiggles that you can see are fit very nicely by the model. And then the places where it isn't is where what's called the residual spectrum is actually showing you the emission lines that are caused by the active galaxy. So these are, this is gas that's excited by the bright light of the AGN, and it emits atomic transitions. These are oxygen lines, H beta, a helium line that's very weak, can't really see it, but H gamma, H delta. Why am I showing you this? Well, I'm showing you this because this is the kind of fantastic quality data we can get with the Hale telescope. But the important thing here is that we are actually measuring the widths of lots of stellar features that are all kind of mushed together because these are lots of different stars. But the width of these features is telling us the velocity dispersion is a few hundred kilometers per second. And that's an average velocity of the stars that are orbiting near the black hole. And that lets us use this same technique that Andrea Ghez used and that many people have used to measure masses of the central object. So from this spectrum, we get an estimate of the black hole mass in this distant galaxy. And that's extremely important. There are probably about 1,000 black hole masses that are really well known, maybe another 1,000 that are less well known, and a great fraction of those come from Palomar. Okay, so we can weigh the black hole. We can also image it. You may have seen, most of the world saw this image of the active galaxy M87 that was released 3 years ago from the Event Horizon telescope team. It's a radio telescope interferometer, whole Earth interferometer. And another image was, this past spring, an image of our Milky Way black hole, which looks very similar, was also released. And the good news is these are amazing pictures from an amazing instrument. The bad news is those are the only 2 black holes it can observe. So imaging at the moment is not a technique for broad studies of black holes, but for detailed studies. Okay, then we get to the third technique, which is what I use, which is to observe the light that is powered by accretion of matter onto the black hole, and to try to use that light to figure out what's going on, how much matter is accreting, and so on. So the basic picture that I'm working from is shown in this cartoon. This is kind of a not to scale sketch of what we think the ingredients of an AGN are at the very center. So there's a little black hole with an accretion disk around it, which is shown here as a little pink donut. And surrounding that are blobs of gas, which are photoionized by the bright UV and X-ray light coming from the accretion disk. And then they emit atomic lines like the ones I just showed you in that spectrum. And if the clouds are very close to the black hole, they're moving rapidly. And so the lines are broadened by the Doppler effect. So we call these broadline clouds. And then if the clouds are very far away, like these ones, we call them narrow line clouds because they're moving much more slowly. But the important thing for this talk is that there's some kind of structure of gas and dust. It's shown here as an orange donut, which is definitely much too simple, which obscures from some lines of sight the very luminous UV optical X-ray emission from the accretion disk and the broadline emission. So if you look from this direction, this side, you would not see broadlines or a bright point source in the center of your galaxy. But if you looked from one of these directions, from sort of the open hole of the donut, you would see the bright accretion disk and the broadlines. Okay. This kind of obscuration is something that for a long time was ignored by optical astronomers, but was pretty well appreciated by X-ray astronomers, which is my training, my background. And that's because of something called the X-ray background. It's not really a background. So the very first X-ray telescopes, they weren't telescopes, sorry, the first X-ray detectors to measure X-rays from the cosmos were on rockets, which can be launched above the atmosphere. And that's because the atmosphere prevents X-rays from coming through, well, we wouldn't be here if X-rays came through the atmosphere, because we'd all have had too many mutations and be gone. We'd be sterilized. The Earth would be sterile. But anyway, if you launch a rocket above the atmosphere, you can see X-rays from the cosmos. And the first rockets were launched in the early 1960s. Sorry, the first X-ray mission, X-ray experiments were launched in the early 1960s. And they saw a couple of individual sources associated with massive stars. And then they saw a broad glow all the way in all directions of roughly similar intensity. And they called that a background, but it's not really a background exactly. It's the summed emission from all the accreting supermassive black holes throughout the universe. And that insight was actually got Riccardo Giacconi the Nobel Prize, I forget, a decade or so ago. So let me just take a moment more to explain this, because this is central to the work I do. So here I'm showing you the spectrum of the X-ray, so-called X-ray background. So this is this diffuse glow that we see across the whole sky. This is intensity, log of intensity of the light that you see in the sky in X-rays as a function of the X-ray energy from a few tenths of a kilovolt to about 100 kilovolts. So this left-hand part is what we call soft X-rays, low energy X-rays. And the right-hand part is what we call hard X-rays, very energetic X-rays. Why is this important? Well, you can easily see it's a very, this is measured with several instruments. You can easily see it's a very peaked spectrum. It peaks at a few tens of keV. If you plotted on this exact plot, the spectrum of an AGN that has no gas or dust on the line of sight, it would be about a horizontal line on this plot, roughly speaking. It has a few structures, but it's basically horizontal. So no amount of those objects is going to add up to this. What happens is that many objects have gas and dust along the line of sight. The gas absorbs X-rays. It's depending on the energy, it's absorbed by carbon or nitrogen or oxygen. But if you have a small column density, then your horizontal line will be absorbed only at the softest energies. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to click. If you have a little more column density, your horizontal line will break off at higher energies. And if you have very high column densities, your line will break at quite high energies. So you have these sort of peaked spectra caused by absorption by gas, which if you add them up, easily make this form. So X-ray astronomers really understood from the early times that there must be heavily absorbed AGN making this up. Probably we understood that, I would say, when I was a graduate student in the 1980s. Okay, so back to the galaxy montage. Another key point is that the radiation emitted by AGN can affect the host galaxy. And so that's why this talk is about both black holes and galaxies. Okay, and I want to give you just a context now in one slide, the history of the universe. So from left to right, this cartoon is meant to show the expanding universe from the Big Bang to today. So time is moving to the right in this cartoon. At the very beginning of the Big Bang, the universe expanded by an enormous amount, a factor of 10 to the 60 or so, in about 10 to the minus 33 seconds. And once that inflationary period ended, which ended rapidly, so good news for inflation ending. Anyway, it then expanded at a sort of a constant rate, which has been divided out of this figure. And what you're supposed to see from this sort of bell-shaped curve was for about half the time, it was slowing down a bit. So it's curving downward. And then for the last half of the history of the universe, it's curving upward. That's the accelerating expansion of the universe caused by dark energy, which unfortunately is not something I'm talking about today. But this whole time span is 13.8 billion years, according to the latest measurements. And what's happening during this time is that there are initial density fluctuations which over time grow into clumps that eventually become stars. So here's the beginning of star formation here, where you suddenly can see light from the first stars form. And they're unusually massive, and because they have no heavy chemical elements to help cool the gas. So they form very large stars, and those burn out extremely quickly and leave behind remnant black holes of maybe 100 solar masses or so. And those, of course, are occurring at the densest parts of this uneven density distribution. And that's where the galaxies are going to grow as well. So the galaxies grow around the black holes. What I mean there is that the black holes grow by accreting matter into them. So matter falling into the black hole. And the galaxy grows by stars forming from the gas around the galaxy. Okay, so that's how galaxy evolution works and how black hole growth fits in. So now I'm going to show you a computer simulation. And again, I've got my optimizer on. Okay, so I hope that works. So this is from the illustrious simulation. It's done in a computer starting from those initial density fluctuations. What you're looking at now is the density of dark matter, which dominates matter in the universe. On the lower left, I hope you can see the time since the Big Bang. It's right now about 1.5 billion years since the Big Bang. And you see that gravity is causing the clumps to get clumpier and the empty parts to get emptier. So this is how the overall structure of the universe evolves. Now there's going to be a color change in just a moment. And instead of dark matter density, we're now looking at the temperature of the gas in the universe, where white and red are very hot. and blue is cool. And you see these sort of bomb-like things happening at various places in these clumpy regions. These are the growth phases of black holes, periods where they're accreting rapidly and therefore heating up, because they produce a lot of radiation, heating up the gas around them. So those are the things that look like huge explosions, each of which takes about probably 100 million years or so. You might also see a little bit of flickering, like little tiny flickering. Those are supernovae, which are the explosions of massive stars at the ends of their lifetimes. And it's not particularly relevant to my talk, but this last color change is now showing the chemical, the amount of heavy elements in the universe produced in stars. So they're everything heavier than helium and hydrogen, the first two elements in the periodic table. Everything beyond that, up to iron, is forged in the interiors of stars and spread out into the intergalactic medium, interstellar medium, intergalactic medium, through supernova explosions, and also the AGN winds can help disperse it and so on. So that's how the universe is evolving, at least in a computer. And this is the kind of thinking that is guiding us as we think about what's happening during periods of black hole growth. And I just want to show it should show the names, yeah, of the people who did this this work. Okay, so now I'm gonna, how am I doing? Okay, now I'm going to tell you about what my research group has done, two different pieces of it. The first is our multi-wavelength census of black hole growth, which we call the accretion history of AGN, or AHA. And if any of you are old enough to remember 80s music, we have a theme song, but I won't I won't put the earworm in your head, but you can look it up. Anyway, there's a group called AHA. They had a big hit. So I'll tell you about that survey and why it's a wedding cake, and what we learned from it, our population synthesis model, which is really a way of describing how much energy AGN can deliver to their host galaxies. And then in the second part, at the end, I'll just talk about what effect AGN have on their host galaxies. And I should say that the theorists have been telling us for 2 decades now that AGN totally drive galaxy evolution. And I guess what I'll tell you is yes, but yes, they do for some galaxies, but actually most galaxies, maybe not. Okay, so the census. First of all, we use X-rays, infrared, and optical measurements. The X-rays prove to be the most efficient way to detect AGN. That's because AGN emit a whole lot of X-rays. So when you do a survey, especially at high galactic latitudes where there are fewer stars, almost every object you see is an AGN. So it's very efficient for finding them. In the infrared, you can find all the AGN that are there, but it's hard to separate the light coming from accretion onto the black hole from the light coming from stars, because stars also produce a lot of infrared light. So there, it's most useful for making sure we correctly measure all the light that's coming out. The optical has historically been the tool of choice because there were optical telescopes and detectors before there were infrared or X-ray telescopes. But in fact, optical surveys miss most obscured AGN. So going back to my little cartoon, remember from in here, you're getting a lot of optical UV and X-ray light, but it's not coming out here. The optical and UV doesn't come out at all. Some of the X-rays do. That's why the X-rays can actually see through some of this dust obscuration. X-rays still miss the very, very most obscured, the ones with high optical depth. We call them Compton thick, because the optical depth to Compton scattering is greater than 1. But they can see many, many, many objects that cannot be detected in optical surveys. Okay, so for my work, I use the NASA's great observatories, the Chandra X-ray telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope, which is an optical UV near infrared telescope, and the Spitzer infrared telescope, which goes out to longer wavelengths than, much longer wavelengths than HST. And we also use the European XMM Newton X-ray telescope. We use ground-based telescopes like the Palomar Hale telescope, and we've also used the Keck telescopes. And in fact, we've used Subaru, which is behind here, behind the two Keck domes. So the key of our multi-wavelength census is to do a better job of the census than can be done with optical surveys. And in particular, to find the obscured black hole growth that's missed by optical surveys. Now, what is this wedding cake stuff I mentioned? So it's a good metaphor for the way we do our surveys. We combine surveys which are small and very deep with ones that are larger and shallower and larger and shallower. And, you know, the largest ones are very shallow. Why? If you had infinite telescope time, you would just do a huge survey to whatever depth you wanted. But it turns out it's redundant. Why? When you survey very deep, you get a small volume, but you measure those objects very well. And those objects are the common ones, which tend to be the low luminosity objects. So the small layer measures your lowest luminosity, and then the larger layers, you go to higher luminosity. And when you get to the largest layer, all you need is a shallow survey to get the highest luminosity because you already measured the lower luminosity ones well. So that's the concept. We used 4 surveys, which I'll describe very briefly. The GOODS, Great Observatory's Origins Deep Survey, which used Hubble, Spitzer, and Chandra, as I said. It's about 1/10 of a square degree. You're looking at a Hubble, the background is the Hubble image of part of that field. About 15 times bigger is the Cosmos survey, which is 1.5 degrees square. This is the X-ray image from XMM. And then 20 times bigger than that is something we did at Yale, the Stripe 82X survey, which is shown here schematically, compared to the other ones, Cosmos, and these two sum up to make GOODS. So you can see it's much bigger. It's about 30 degrees in the region we surveyed in X-rays, and about 300 square degrees in the total survey area. And then we had an all sky layer with the Swift-Bat survey, which is a hard X-ray telescope that looks at about 30,000 square degrees of extragalactic sky. Okay, and just to show you what I'm talking about coverage with the wedding cake, this is the log of the luminosity of the objects we found versus the log of their redshifts. And they're color coded by survey. So for example, the Stripe 82 survey is in red here. And you can see that every survey sort of maps out a diagonal region. And it's really easy to understand why. It's because below, you can't see anything fainter than some limit. And this is the limit right here for this yellow survey. Here's the limit for the blue survey. But you can, but you also don't see a lot of, because you have a small volume, you don't see a lot of rare things that are very luminous. So this is why you have to have a wedding cake. So you can cover this LZ space with more than just a line. Okay, so what do we do with these data? Okay, I should speed up. This is in print. Okay, what do people did population synthesis models now for a few decades. What that means is you have some kind of distribution, some number of objects as a function of their luminosity, their redshift, which is distance or age in the universe, and the amount of obscuration they have. And you know what their X-ray spectra are because you've measured them for lots of different objects. And you put these together and you see if you can fit the X-ray background. But that's actually kind of a limited approach because the X-ray it's very degenerate. With the X-ray background, all you have to do is sum up to that spectrum I showed, and you could increase some number of objects and decrease some others and still fit it. So it's a not strong constraint. So we pioneered doing a multi-wavelength population synthesis, which my first graduate student at Yale, Ezekiel Truster, did. Not only did he fit the X-ray background spectrum, but he fit the brightness distributions at all wavelengths. That means a number of objects as a function of how bright they appear, and the redshift distribution, and also the fraction of very heavily obscured AGN, and many other things. And then that model tells you what the total black hole growth is. And we found that one of the big punchlines is that 3/4 of black hole accretion is sufficiently obscured that it would be missed in optical surveys. In other words, the optical data up to that time, up until the good survey, actually, which is what this was based on, had missed 3/4 of the growing black holes in the universe. Very recently, my Tunima Anana, another graduate student, took the enormous amount of data that has happened since the good survey, including our AHA survey and others, and she put all those data together in a comprehensive model, just of the X-ray part in this case, because it's very complicated. She found that, previous work didn't fit the existing data, so she had to make a new model, and it was so complicated. Actually, she would come in every week or so and show me what she had, and I'd say, well, that doesn't fit well enough. You have to do better. And so she went away for 3 weeks and coded up a neural network that would adjust the parameters for her, and came back and had actually created the right model. So I'm going to results from that. Just really quickly, here is the X-ray background spectrum that we looked at before. Here are the various fits to it. If you just look at a few of these lines, this dashed line here, this yellow line here, the 2 green and blue lines down below, none of them fit properly. If they fit at some wavelength, they don't fit at the other, or some energy, they don't fit at the others. And this dark line here is her model, which fits extremely well until you get to about 100 kV, and then blazars come in. So it's a different population that we aren't interested in at this time. Okay, so this is her result. It's the state-of-the-art model. No one, it supersedes everything before because they don't work at all. I'm gonna skip these slides. So I'm just gonna say, let's skip those ones. They fit pretty well. Here's one example of the many, out of that table, she had about 30 constraints. So here's one of them, just to give you an example. These data show the numbers of Compton thick AGN as a function of their flux. And just to show you again, these 3 colored lines here are what previous models would have predicted. These 2 don't fit at all. This one sort of is okay. And here's her model. And the point is there are 30 plots like this, all independent measurements, which are the same, where sometimes some of these other models work, but they don't in others, but hers works in all of them. And I'll skip this one too. And I'm just going to show one more, which is after she had finished her model, written the paper, submitted the paper, we found out that Ryan Hickox at Dartmouth was looking at the resolved X-ray background. What that means is you look at the sources you can detect as a function of energy, and you ask what fraction of the total energy is resolved and what fraction is still a diffuse glow. So this is individual sources you can detect in the diffuse glow. And this is what he found for a high energy. This is really important. This is a new NASA mission, the New Star Telescope. Well, it's not that new. I guess it was launched. Wow, it's probably launched 10 years ago. But anyway, he said none of the models that he had access to came close to fitting this. And what did her model say? And she ran her model changing no parameters, okay, adjusting nothing. And this is what she found. It goes right through the data points. So that was very reassuring. And then he did the same for the Chandra data. So that's shown here in green. And here, for example, is one of these other models that preceded a lot of the new data, including the New Star data and this Chandra data. And it doesn't fit. And Tonima ran her model for the Chandra particulars, and here's what she got. So this validated what she had done and showed that we were on the right track and that we have, a model that is correctly describing the accretion onto every black hole, every supermassive black hole for the last 12 billion years. That's a good sentence. I have to remember that sentence. Okay, anyway, let me skip that. I've just told you that. So I'm gonna quickly pivot to the other topic, which will go more quickly, and that is, what effect do these AGN have on their host galaxies? The theorists are telling us that it's a profound effect on every galaxy. And but I have a postdoc, Kevin Shawinski, who came to work with me at Yale about a decade ago, and he was very interested in morphologies of galaxies, and I'm a convert that that's really important now. And he and Chris Lintott, who I know you've heard from before, they were the co-founders of Galaxy Zoo, and that's why he was interested in morphology. So now I'm just going to tell you a really quick story about galaxy evolution, and to do it, I need to introduce the color mass diagram for galaxies. So I'm going to show a bunch of plots that look like this. So I'm going to explain what this is. This is a plot of color of galaxies, where red galaxies are at the top and blue are at the bottom, versus the log of the stellar mass of the galaxy. So from 1 billion to 100 billion solar masses. And the contours are contours for the 1 million galaxies observed with the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. So this is a well-known plot where you see two clumps of galaxies. One at the top is called the red sequence because they're red. And the one at the bottom is the blue cloud. In the blue cloud is where all the star formation is happening. And then when star formation stops, the blue stars die quickly, and then the stars age to, in between is the green valley. The stars age up in this diagram. So once you quench star formation, galaxies should move upward. Takes hundreds of millions of years, but they move upward. And it's interesting that there's very few galaxies in the green valley. It's really a valley. And so theorists are telling us that these galaxies in the blue cloud are rapidly evolving across the green valley because they don't spend much time here, or you'd see more galaxies there, because we see a snapshot in time, right? And also they're suggesting that AGN help make that transition quick. And the idea is that galaxies in the blue cloud merge together. Okay, if they merge together, their mass will increase, so they move to the right. Okay. And when they merge, that can trigger an AGN accretion. And the AGN radiation can quench star formation. So the theorists are telling us that blue star-forming galaxies merge, trigger an AGN that quenches star formation, and the galaxy rapidly evolves across the green valley into the red sequence, where it's called a red and dead galaxy. That's the theoretical picture. Okay. And sometimes this is referred to as AGN feedback. I don't need to explain why it's called that. It's just called that because the idea is the AGN is affecting the star formation, is quenching the star formation. And Kevin Shawinski looked into this in detail, and he wrote a paper called "The Green Valley is a Red Herring." It's a catchy title, and he used the Galaxy Zoo morphologies to sort of overturn this picture. For those who don't know Galaxy Zoo, I'll just tell you the founding story as I heard it from Kevin. So Kevin, for his thesis at Oxford University, had to visually classify 50,000 galaxies by eye. So he looked at each image, 50,000 of these things, and decided whether they were, spheroidal galaxies that had recently merged or disk galaxies that had not recently merged. And then after he finished that, he went to the bar with Chris Lintott and was complaining about how much work it was and how nobody would ever do that again. And anyway, to do better, they'd have to do, 500,000 of them instead of 50,000. And no one was ever going to do that. And that's when they decided to put the galaxies online for a citizen scientist to classify by eye. And that turned out to be a great project. I don't have time to talk about how it's actually much better than what astronomers were doing before. But I'll show you some results. Here are some Galaxy Zoo examples from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. In the top row are galaxies that 80% or more of the classifiers said were spheroidal. And at the bottom row are galaxies that 80% or more of the classifiers said are disks. So spheroids and disks, and in between there are a lot of galaxies that are a mix of the two, but we're going to ignore those for the moment. And this shows they come in different colors. So now let's go back to our color mass diagram. Now this color mass diagram is for the entire Sloan Digital Sky Survey, 1 million galaxies. What Kevin did that was so insightful is to divide this by morphology. So he did a diagram for only the spheroids and only the disks, okay? And here are those diagrams. Here are the spheroids up here, and here are the disks. And the first thing you notice is that, well, okay, let's look at the top first. This figure is perfectly in line with the theoretical picture. The idea is there are not many blue spheroids. They're rare, and they only happen when two blue disk galaxies merge. So that happens rarely. So there are very few of them compared to how many blue disk galaxies there are. But once they're there, they must evolve extremely rapidly because there aren't very many at any of these intermediate colors until they get to the red. So this is the standard picture of merging, triggering an AGN, triggering quenching, fast evolution. In the bottom diagram is the part that doesn't fit the theory at all. Here you see, okay, lots of blue disks and really not much else. I mean, actually what makes these a little bit redder is that they have a bulge from mergers. So it's actually not at all this picture, and it doesn't look like that. And there was one more thing he did, which bear with me, I'm going to show you another set of these diagrams. Now I'm going to show you, this is the same thing, color versus mass. On the top are the spheroids, on the bottom are the disks. On the left are low mass halos. On the right are high mass halos. Okay, let me explain. A halo is basically the clump within which a galaxy sits, and it's a clump dominated by dark matter, but it's yeah, okay. And so the point here is that okay, look at the spheroids. You don't see much difference. Obviously, these are more massive because you made a cut where these are more massive. So that's not surprising, but they look sort of the same. If you look at the disks, they look completely different. And that's because we think that disks don't evolve much at all. They just sit there making more stars all the time until their mass, their halo mass and the galaxy mass, the two things track each other, gets high enough that matter trying to fall into the halo just gets too hot to go in. So it's like when the mass gets big enough, it stops growing. And then the stars don't have any more fuel to make stars. They don't have any more gas out of which stars can be formed. And so it's when the halo mass is high that the stars stop forming. And you start seeing these things are all red, right? The most galaxies at high halo mass are red, and they're evolving upward to the red sequence. So the evolution in disk galaxies is not driven by mergers or AGN. It's driven by halo mass. Okay, so I'm at the end. Let me just summarize. I'll just say we also did this experiment at Redshift 1 and found the same stuff. So I'm going to recap. What I've just told you is that most galaxies, and in fact, most AGN host galaxies are disks and have nothing to do with mergers triggering AGN or AGN feedback affecting galaxies. We do think mergers are very important in the highest luminosity AGN, called quasars often. And these are very few. It's a very small percentage of all galaxies. Is a significant fraction of the total black hole mass accreted. So they're important to study, but they're not a major factor in galaxy evolution. In fact, most galaxies quench slowly, and the black hole appears to not be very important in affecting them. And just one last slide to recap what I told you before about my other, the multi-wavelength census, is that we found that most black hole growth is obscured. That, and we also showed that the absorbed UV soft X-ray energy that is absorbed by this torus heats the torus and it radiates in the infrared, and we can do the energy balance and see that that works. We've done a wedding cake survey. We have a new population synthesis model that is the state of the art. And just to leave you with one tidbit I haven't mentioned, that's kind of cool. The model is telling you how much light is emitted at every epoch, at every redshift over cosmic time. And you can add that all up. You can just integrate it up to get the total light emitted that's due to black hole accretion over all time. And then you can compare that light to the local black hole mass, density. How much you take all the black holes locally, they're the endpoints of that, right? You had to accrete all their mass essentially to produce that light. So you can compare the amount of light to the amount of mass and get the energy efficiency. How efficient is it at converting mass to light? And the answer is incredibly high. It's really 35%, 40%. You can convert accreting matter into energy, which is, if any of you know, like nuclear power or nuclear fusion in stars, which is even more better than anything we have on Earth, is, you know, a few hundredths of a percent efficiency. So this is like the most efficient you could ever imagine any energy conversion. If we could harness the energy of black holes, we'd have no energy problems on Earth for the next billion years, probably. Okay, but we don't. We have real energy production, so it's just a fun cosmic fact for now. Thank you. And I'll stop.
Urry, thank you very much. That was an engaging and fascinating discussion, and I would invite everyone to turn on their microphones and questions, please.
There are a few. Should I try to answer these questions that have been asked? Let us see. Some of them I'm not sure I get, but are neutrinos able to escape the gravitational pull of the event horizon of the black hole? And the answer is no, because they have mass. It doesn't matter if they don't have mass, even if they're massless. They can't escape black holes. They are probably produced in the jets that are formed outside black holes and that escape in a fraction of objects, very energetic jets, and those produce neutrinos that are starting to be detected by telescopes in Antarctica. I understand this question. Is gravitational lensing observable around black holes or just galaxies? It would be observable. Well, it is observable. Sorry. The image I showed of M87 that was taken with the Event Horizon Telescope, which I can quickly run back to. Let me find it. Just have to scoot along here. This way. No, other way. I think there should be a faster way to go backwards, but let's just do it this way. Okay. Slides, and we're almost there. There it is. Okay, here is the Event Horizon Telescope image. The reason it looks like this is because of gravitational lensing. We're actually seeing the backside of the black hole, and the rays that would normally, you know, if there were no gravity, the rays would just go out spherically in all directions. But light rays are bent by gravity, or rather, they travel through curved space. Space is curved by the mass of the black hole. And so light rays from the back that would ordinarily just go away from us actually bend up and over and come to us. So we see a ring. There's a beautiful explanation of this online, which I'll try to add the link. I have it. I mean, I have to look it up, but I can add the link in the chat maybe to show that you shall look at if you want to see how this image came to be. or rather, yeah, how the black hole makes the light around it look like this. It's really cool. I don't know if there are other questions. This interesting how the mass log chart seems proportional in 1/3 rounds for each. I wasn't quite sure what that one was, but it's nice observation.
I have a question about the model
Mhm.
that you used. The difference between the model that you developed and the other models, is it, are there different terms in the models, or are you just changing the coefficients?
Oh, that's a good question. They're similar. They're similar. There are different assumptions, like what you assume about, if you like, the parameters change. And because we have more knowledge now about what the full range of AGN spectra are and what the NH distribution should be and so on, we have better constraints on each of those parameters. But I also think some of the previous models did not bother to fit everything we knew. And so it's also better in that way, I would say.
Thank you.
Not to brag.
Yeah.
There was a question a second ago in the chat asked, is the universe spherical?
Oh, good question. So, of course, we can't exactly measure the geometry of the universe as a whole, or we haven't done so yet, let's put it that way. But what we can do is ask, does it look the same in all directions? And as far as we can tell, it does. But whether that's saying it's spherical or just that our horizon is spherical, I don't know. So the horizon being spherical is the idea that since it's now about 13.8 billion years since the Big Bang, we can only see that far. And as time goes on, our horizon lengthens. So we always have a spherical horizon in that sense. Now, if matter were distributed anisotropically, then space-time would be curved in some funny way where we ought to be able to see signs of it. So it's not anisotropic at that level, but it could still be it is anisotropic at some level, because we look and, there's different galaxies over there than over there, and they're not in the exact opposite positions, right? If you don't have galaxies on a grid, so there are differences, but the average density, the average brightness of all the backgrounds, it's all the same modulo the effects of our motion through the frame.
Would you go over the point of AGN radiation quenching star formation? My mind kind of wandered to the notion maybe it's a physical effect, maybe you disrupt the gravitational concentration of matter and then the nuclear fusion process, but I got the impression it's something else.
No, you have it. I went very quickly there. Yeah, the idea is, so stars, in order to form, they form out of cold, very, very cold gas that slowly gravity is pulling together. Actually, let me give a slightly broader answer too, because I also referred to the very massive stars in the first generation. So I'll explain that at the same time. So as a gas cloud is coalescing, it is cooling a little bit by radiating permitted transitions. So in gas that cold, it's usually molecular vibrational lines. So it's radiating from various species, and it gets colder and it keeps shrinking. At some point it fragments, and each of those fragments becomes a star. That's how stars are formed. So I just want to say, in the first generation of stars, there are fewer ways to cool the gas because there are no heavy elements. So if you don't have carbon's not going to radiate through atomic transitions. So you only have helium and hydrogen transitions that can radiate, and there are many fewer of them. So the gas doesn't cool the same way, and so it just stays very massive. It doesn't fragment. That's why the first generation, and only the first generation of stars, is unusually heavy. After that, after they've exploded, then the gas everywhere is polluted with the elements they made. So later generations of stars are on average much smaller. The thing about the question you asked about AGN, how do AGN stop that process? There are basically two easy ways to think of it. One is AGN are producing a lot of radiation, a huge amount of radiation, and that heats the gas. So instead of collapsing, it puffs out, it moves. It, like in the movie I showed, it blows out instead of coalescing into stars. So it stops stars from forming. It may also be the case that there are winds, not radiation, but actual that AGN launch, winds of matter going out, which do the same thing. They disrupt the clouds that would have formed stars. So those are the two mechanisms by which AGN are supposed to quench star formation.
Thank you.
I have a question about your slide with the, let's see, the blue cloud, the green valley, and I guess it's the red sequence there, and nothing in the green valley. I always like to think that nature is sort of continuous, and I don't like the fact that this green valley is being ignored. And what I'm thinking is maybe the instrumentation is not the right instrumentation for seeing things that are in the green valley. Or, I mean, this always makes me nervous when nature isn't continuous.
Okay, let me go to that plot. Hold on, I just have to share. I can just do the whole screen for this one. There it is. Okay. So this is the diagram you're talking about. Actually, maybe I should show a cleaner one, perhaps. Let's go back a few. So in this particular case, these galaxies are all detected. These are two fairly close wavelengths, U and R. This is a 4,000 angstroms and 6,000 angstroms roughly, and they're detected with very much the same limit. The same sensitivity. There's no difference between, it's the same telescope, it's two different filters, same detectors. So there's really no way that you would miss something in the middle if they were there. I take your point that you should ask, why are we missing things here? Could we have a sudden drop in sensitivity somehow there? But this is, of course, a ratio of fluxes essentially. Oh, I didn't explain that, but it's subtraction because magnitudes are logs. So it's a ratio of the brightness of the two bands, how blue it is, how red it is, essentially. And there's really no way you could have these. Yeah, there's no way related to detector or telescope sensitivity that could create this kind of pattern. So that's how we don't, I mean, we certainly interrogate those kinds of biases for sure. In fact, we factor in detectability in everything we do and correct for it, but it couldn't affect this. But I will say we don't see things move across there, right? Because individual galaxies, we just get its state now. And if we waited 100 years, it would look identical because the time scales on which these galaxies evolve are millions to hundreds of millions to billions of years. And so humans are never going to see any change in any galaxy. This is why astronomers 100 years ago had big debates about whether galaxies ever changed at all, because we never saw them change at all. And then this wonderful astronomer, Beatrice Tinsley, who was at Yale long before I ever got there, she started the field of stellar evolution because we understood that stars evolve. And so if stars evolve, galaxies must evolve, but we had never observed it. So she had to do it all theoretically. How would they look different? And then how we studied that was by understanding that when we look at many, many galaxies, we see instances of ones that were young and ones that are old. And so we're seeing a snapshot of things across this evolutionary landscape, but we don't ever see any one object evolve.
William Griswold, you had a question. Would you you ask it, please?
Thank you. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
Okay, thanks. I just have a very simple question. When I stand and look at the Milky Way on the Earth, where exactly is the black hole that I
Oh,
visually?
yeah. Well, if you stand in the northern hemisphere, you're not looking at it. So, of course, you know, in principle, you see it as a sort of a band across the sky. And if you could see all the way around, if you could, you know, travel around the surface of the Earth, you could see the whole 360 degrees of that band. And the black hole is in the galactic center, which is only visible from the southern hemisphere. So you have to go down to Chile and look at the Milky Way there. And then you'd have to ask somebody where Sagittarius A star is, or you could look up the position and find it. And then you could look in the direction of the black hole. You wouldn't really, I don't think you'd know, you certainly wouldn't notice an empty spot because it's just much too small. You wouldn't resolve it.
Well, I have done that actually, except I think I had the camera pointed straight up. I was trying to show you that picture, but I can't make it visualize on this. Well, I'll keep working on it then. See if I, because there is morphology in the clouds of the Milky Way, which I guess should define for me what where Sagittarius A is.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
what
it is in a fixed location. Yeah. And actually it may be visible from farther south in the northern hemisphere. I don't know exactly what the latitude is. I don't remember.
Take a Galapagos cruise. You'll be able to
Yeah.
see it, and you'll see all sorts of southern stuff that we never see here in California.
I am game, yes.
Australia's amazing because it's so dark in the outback.
I remember observing on at the not Magellan, but on the Las Campanas mountain, and it was so dark that you could read by the light of the Milky Way. You could see a shadow. You could see your shadow, but the only light was from the Milky Way.
There was a question, what fraction of the mass of the universe is tied up in black holes?
Oh, that's a really good question. Okay, I think I can sort of answer it on the fly. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but okay, of the total mass energy density of the universe, 3/4 is dark energy, 1/4 is matter. Of that matter, about 80% is dark matter. And so let's say that's 20% of the total, and 5% is ordinary matter. Of that, about less than 1% is stars in galaxies. Okay, so 1%, let's just say 1 to make the numbers easy. 1% of all the matter of all the mass energy density of the universe is in galaxies. And of that, 1/1000th is in black holes. So it's 1/1000th of 1%. Roughly.
It's interesting.
Have to think about that one for a moment. 1/1000th of 1%.
Black holes then are not to be feared because they're just not much around.
I don't think, I don't think you're going to end by black hole directly. If we had a black hole, you know, if we had an active black hole at the center of our galaxy, that is, if it were accreting at a high rate, then we'd be in danger from all the radiation that it would produce and maybe the energetic outflows as well. But the black hole itself, you know, like being sucked into a black hole, that's not in the cards.
I guess we've been running here for almost an hour and a half, and Professor Urry, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for this discussion. Can Can I end off with a question? Well, yes, I can.
Of course.
Of course I can. You have campaigned for gender equality
Oh, good.
in professions and in society generally. Well, here at Palomar, here in the Palomar Pantheon, Vera Rubin is a personage of very great importance. And there's a famous story of how Vera Rubin broke a barrier here. First woman to observe on the Hale telescope under her own name. And well, perhaps she made some progress, perhaps she broke a barrier, but years later, in 2011, she was denied the Nobel Prize. Have conditions for women in the scientific professions improved over the years? Is it likely that that improvement will continue? What is the state of our consciousness in that area?
Oh, thank you for the question.
Good
Wow.
question.
Wow. So yes, things have improved enormously. I remember as a graduate student in around 1980, Vera Rubin came and gave a talk at my university. And I remember a talk about her discovery of the rotation curves of galaxies being very flat, implying there's a lot of matter that we don't see in stars, which it turns out to be dark matter. And she was, I remember she was not treated well. She was not treated respectfully, and certainly was not presented as, you know, a leading light of the field. Certainly by her later years, by the 20 years later, she was extremely well known, well feted, if not the Nobel Prize, which they've missed many great scientists. She was recognized by many others. There's a play about her, actually. That's a lovely play, which has only a few characters. Newton is one of them, and she's the other. It's been done at several planetariums. It's really good. So I do think there's been a great deal of change, and I think that at the younger end of things, there's so many brilliant young women doing astronomy now that it has changed our field. Oh, I just promise this is not a plug. I mean, not a plant. This book just came out. It's called The Sky is for Everyone. It's edited by David Weintraub and Virginia Trimble. And it's 37 chapters, each written by a different woman astronomer about they're short, about their history, how they got into science, why they do astronomy, what they found. They're all different. Some of them really emphasize the science they did. Some of them emphasize their childhood. Some of them emphasize, the gender discrimination. But I'm in there. That's why I know about it. But I highly recommend it. You can get it anywhere online. It's Princeton Press, The Sky is for Everyone. And I picked it up. It just came out last month, and I picked it up and couldn't put it down. And I think it gives you a really good flavor of the variety of experiences that women have had, spanning almost 50 years, more than 50 years. So I highly recommend it if you are interested.
Is one of the essays in that book about Jocelyn Bell Burnell?
Yes. Jocelyn's in there, and there are a few people who are not. Virginia is Vera Rubin is not in here because she is dead. And Margaret Burbage is not in here, but there is an opening chapter that I think Virginia Trimble wrote, which talks about the historic women and their contributions. And it's just fascinating. I mean, all the people you might know, some of you know Anila Sargent from Caltech, Judy Cohen from Caltech, Wendy Friedman, who was at Carnegie. It's just an amazing book. Jocelyn's in there, Sydney Wolfe, Anne Bozard. I found a lot that I didn't know, even though I'm old enough to know most of them. I don't know the young people. I know the older people, and it's just fascinating. It was fascinating to me.
Jocelyn Bell Burnell gave a talk. I live near UC Irvine, and Jocelyn Bell Burnell gave a talk about the discovery, I guess, of quasars. And I asked her afterwards, how did you sort of feel that the credit for this in a certain way was taken from you? And she said, you know, she said, I got over it very fast. I just continued doing my work. You know, that's what I do. I'm an astrophysicist. I just continue doing. That was her answer to this.
Yeah,
injustice.
I've heard her say that. I know her, and she you know, and that's a fair. She's been contributing, you know, forever. She's been doing great things. But I will say that had a young British or Scottish, I guess, man as a graduate student done what she had done, he would have been catapulted to the top of the profession. Yeah. And she was not. She spent 20 years wandering around with no permanent position. Later, she has been highly recognized. And I want to mention, she hasn't gotten the Nobel Prize, but she didn't get the Nobel Prize for pulsars, but she did get the Breakthrough Prize, which is actually worth more money. And you know what she did with it? It's $3 million. She put it in a foundation to help young women of color progress in STEM. And that says everything.
Do you have any views on the most welcoming STEM communities for rising women?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, certainly I came up through physics departments, and I love physics, but I have to say physics is way less friendly than astronomy. And I think a lot of the reason I went into astrophysics is because it was just a friendly environment. People were, people hung out and went to picnics and played volleyball, and it just felt like they were human beings in a way that the physicists didn't always quite reach. Nowadays, I think physics is still a tough field. Math is a very tough field for women. Economics, by the way, which isn't quite STEM, is pretty hostile to women. And I think it's mostly cultural. It's not conscious discrimination for the most part. It's just, you can do this test in whatever field you're in and let me know if my hypothesis is incorrect. But I think that the fields that people self-identify as the most important and the most elite, those are the fields in which you find the fewest women. So if you're a physician, for example, lots of women are in pediatrics, not a prestigious field. I hope I'm not insulting anyone. I mean, what I'm saying is who are it's the neurosurgeons, the surgeons, it's the surgeons, right? Am I right? The surgeons are the high caste of the medical profession, and it's the most hostile to women. There's a great book called Walking Out on the Boys by Frances Conley, which tells you more than you need to know about how tough it is for women in, I think she was a cardiac surgeon. So think about your own profession and just think, like, where's the elite corner of this? Like in astronomy, which is a very friendly profession, go look at the theoretical cosmologists. Man, that is tough. That's a tough room for women to work in. And they think they're the smartest people on the planet. So wherever people think they're the smartest people on the planet, I think they're sure that women can't fit in. I don't know.
I would think also the younger fields.
They're high on the arrogance scale.
Also, yes, arrogance scale. The arrogance correlates with lack of women. And I think the younger fields, that's a very interesting. So if you look at exoplanets, right? We only discovered exoplanets 20 years ago, and there are lots of women in that field. Modulo, the one bad actor who actually pushed a lot of women out of the field because they didn't want to be sexually harassed by him. But there are lots of very successful women in exoplanets. So I think that's true, that the newer fields have more openings for broader groups.
Yeah. I would. So biological sciences, anything new, not quite so many in civil engineering. with boots and concrete and bulldozers.
Yeah, if you look at engineering is a good one. So biomedical engineering is pretty new, comparatively speaking, and it's half women at the undergraduate level.
Hmm.
Half women, yeah. And civil engineering, not so much. Electrical engineering. You know what's sad? The only one that doesn't fit in is computer science, which had a lot of women at the beginning, especially because coding was not the prestigious part. Hardware was the prestigious part. So back in the, the Hopper days, they were doing coding, and the coding, there were lots of women, hidden figures, yada, yada. There's lots of women, but then once it became cool, the women disappeared.
Well, I worked in a bank in the late 1970s, and the early information system department in that bank was almost all women.
Interesting.
And took a while to figure out, but the reason was men don't type.
Huh.
Women type.
Women had typing in high school, yes, that's really interesting. I still to this day can see the women in science are touch typing, and the men, or at least my age, maybe younger, they're all doing it, but the men my age can't touch type. Interesting. So that skill, which was to send us to the secretarial route, has nonetheless helped us in STEM.
Yes. We're really running over time here. I think we need to wind down, and I really appreciate the discussion. Professor Urry, thank you very much. I guess what I'd like to do is take just a minute and talk about our next Greenway event. The next Greenway Talks online will take place on Saturday, August 20th. Dr. Ashley Baker is an instrument scientist with Caltech Optical Observatories. Among other projects, she is presently building a new instrument for exoplanet research that will be used at prime focus on the Hale telescope. The instrument will be named HIREX, and she described HIREX as a different form, a different type of instrument designed is specifically for the optimization, measurement of sodium in exoplanet atmospheres. It will achieve this by utilizing multiple ultra-narrowband optical filters to image an exoplanet's transit. So with that, again, thank you, Meg Urry. Everybody wave. Everybody wave.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody, for being here and supporting the Greenway Talks. With that, I'll close the meeting, and we'll see you on August 20th. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.